This is a Munich Dunkel that I brewed in my garage using a double decoction process. It has rich malt flavor with notes of toasted bread and subtle chocolate. In this video, I'll show you how to make it. Let's brew. Munich Dunkels come from one of the greatest beer regions on earth, Munich, Germany. A Bavarian city known for some of the best beer in the world and also home of Oktoberfest. Dunkels are dark, malty beers with a rich and complex malt profile. They have notes of toasted bread crust, nuts, chocolate, maybe even a little caramel, but although they're dark, they don't have any roasty character. The key to these beers is high quality malt and a specific mash process. The first thing I'm gonna do is start preheating the mash water. The first temperature rest today is at 130 degrees, which is at the pretty high end of a protein rest. Grain these days is super well modified, so not much is needed, but I still like to do a 10-minute rest here. This is 6 gallons of reverse osmosis water, and I'm gonna heat this to 146 degrees, which is a little hotter than we need, but we're gonna lose a little heat when I pump this over to the mash tun. For the grain in this beer, we have mostly Munich malt, a little bit of Pilsner in here. This is 80% Munich and 20% Pilsner. I'm also gonna add a little bit of Carafa III, but I'm gonna wait until it's time to sparge to add that in. Here's a close-up of the crushed grain. I mill with a gap of about 60 thousandths of an inch. Most of the husk are still intact and we have a good crush on the grain. The husk of the grain will later help us filter the wort when we recirculate it through the grain bed at the end of the mash. My water is now at 146 degrees, so I'm now gonna build my water profile. I have 4.5 grams calcium chloride, 0.7 grams calcium sulfate, and 1.5 grams magnesium sulfate. I'm also adding 2 milliliters of lactic acid to my water. This is just to help ensure the room temperature pH of the mash stays at about 5.2. Water is ready. I'm gonna turn off the heater and the pump and start mixing in the grain. This step right here is the dough in, and the goal is to kind of mix this in slowly. If we dump it too fast, the grain will clump up and we don't want that. So mix it in little by little and fully saturate that grain. Okay, all the grain is mixed in. The system has cooled to just above 130 degrees. We're gonna keep it here for just 10 minutes and then I'm gonna raise it up to 145 degrees for a 30-minute beta rest. I'm just gonna grab a small sample just to check the pH. I have a little bowl of ice water here and I just use that to cool the sample down to room temperature before I take the measurement. Alright, now for the best part, the decoction. We are doing a double decoction on this beer. Stick around to the end of the video and I'll give you my thoughts on decoction. So I'm gonna pull about 1/3 of the mash for the decoction, which is about 2 gallons. I use this large strainer right here so I can get mostly grain out. I'm also gonna add a little bit of liquid back in here too, but the goal is to have a fairly thick decoction. Okay, now I'm gonna bring this into the kitchen and boil it for 20 minutes. The rest of the mash will sit here at 145 degrees. While we wait for the decoction to finish, please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss future videos. The 20-minute mash is done. I'm gonna add this back into the main mash. The main mash temp will rise to somewhere between about 150 to 160 degrees. The next step is an alpha rest, which will be at 160 degrees for 10 minutes. For the second decoction, we're gonna do the same exact thing as the first. About 2 gallons and boil for 20 minutes. While the decoction is finishing up, I'm gonna add my Sparge Water to the HLT and preheat that to 170 degrees. Alright, our second decoction is complete. I'm gonna add this back to the main mash, which should bring it up to 160 to 170 degrees. And we'll hold it there for about 10 minutes and then do a 5-minute boil off before lautering. I'm now gonna start lautering over to the boil kettle. This is the part when I add in my Carafa III to the top of the mash bed. And the reason I wait till this stage to add in my roasted grains is to try to avoid extracting some of those harsher, astringent characters that you can get from dark roasted grain like this. We're doing 2 hop additions today. Both are 28 grams of Hallertau. Now that we have a little wort in the kettle, I'm gonna add in that first hop addition. The lauter process should take some time. You wanna go pretty slow, about 45 to 60 minutes at a minimum. Alright, I have about 6 gallons transferred to the boil kettle. I'm gonna turn on the heater to start bringing this up to a boil while we wait for that lauter to finish. We are at a full volume of 9 gallons. I'm now gonna take a small sample to measure the pre-boil gravity. We're boiling for a total of 90 minutes. After 20 minutes, I'll add in my second addition of Hallertau hops and we'll boil that for 70 minutes. There are 15 minutes remaining in the boil. I'm now adding in 1 Whirlpool tablet, which is used to help clarify the beer and flocculate some of the proteins in the wort. For the final 10 minutes of the boil, I'm adding in a little yeast nutrient. Now it's time to start the Whirlpool. I'm gonna turn off the heater and I'm also gonna open up the Whirlpool valve. And then I'll kick on the pump for a 5-minute Whirlpool. After the Whirlpool, I'll let the wort rest for about 10 minutes and hook up my oxygen to the chiller knockout. And then my groundwater to the chiller. Alright, it's time to knock out. I'm gonna kick on the cooling water and then knock out directly to the fermenter. I like to get about 4 gallons into the fermenter and then start the oxygen. The oxygen is set to 1 liter per minute and we'll run that for about 90 seconds. For most beers, I like to chill the fermenter to about 2 degrees below my desired fermentation temperature. This beer will ferment at 50 degrees, so I'm gonna chill this down to 48 degrees. Before I add the yeast to the tank, I'm gonna take a small sample to measure the oxygen concentration, the pH, and also the original gravity. The last step for today is to pitch the yeast. This is a yeast starter of 3470 I made a few days ago. I decanted the starter wort and I now have about 500 milliliters of slurry in here, and I'm just gonna add that to the fermenter. I'm going to allow the tank to rise to 50 degrees and we'll keep it there for the entire fermentation. And once that's complete, I'll do a check for diacetyl and then start crashing this down to lager. I'll leave a link in the description regarding that diacetyl rest process. For crashing, I like to do 2 degrees per day until we get to 36 degrees, which takes a week. Then we'll lager at that temperature for 6 to 8 weeks in the keg. All right, let's talk about decoction. This is a hotly debated topic in the beer world. I'm just gonna give you my thoughts. Here are the facts. Decoction has more steps and ultimately it's a longer process. And basically what you're doing during a decoction is adding additional Maillard reactions to the beer, which is the same thing that happens when you toast bread or roast marshmallows. Why I like to do decoctions for beers like this is it gives it a really intense malty character. You can kind of mimic the effect of a decoction by adding different malt to the grain bill, like melanoidin, for example, but ultimately this will change the beer and can give it a different flavor and profile. All in all, decoction just makes a different beer. Not necessarily better or worse, that's for you to decide. But I'd love to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think of decoction? Is it worth the extra time? But that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out for this Munich Dunkel brew day. Thank you to Yeti for sponsoring this video. Please don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.